Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another public program sponsored by the Massachusetts Historical Society. I'm Catherine Allgore. I'm president of the society here. Um, in the past week or so, we've had the occasion to mark a lot of very sad anniversaries. Um, for us at the Historical Society, we left our beautiful building on Boylston Street in March 10th, so over a year ago. But there are some unexpected anniversaries to note as well. We just passed the 1 year anniversary of our virtual public programs. We set some, I don't know, some all time records. There's been 10,000 of you who have tuned in, listened, shared your thoughts, asked your questions, added comments. And for that, I'm very grateful, even in a season of fear, a season of loss. You are what we've gained. So if you, whether you're a new fan or a friend of long standing, get to know us better. Please go on masshist.org. That's our website. There you'll find more public programs. You'll find our exhibition, all kinds of news. Also, we're on social media. So please like us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And they are on the platforms. You'll find a lot of the same information. So you can also link through Massachusetts Historical Society. And are you out there live tweeting? I hope you are. Please use the hashtag MHS 1791. That's the year of our founding, MHS 1791. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming along with us during this year for this journey. So Gavin, why don't you get us started on tonight's program?
Thank you very much, Catherine. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for our program today. My name is Gavin Cleespies, and I'm the Director of Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Partnerships for the Massachusetts Historical Society. It's nice to see a good group attending this event. Back in pre-pandemic programs, which is a bit tricky to say, we would host a reception before the talk, and I always made an effort to welcome people who I didn't recognize in case it was their first time visiting MHS. Now that we're all virtual, I have no idea if there are new people joining the program. So let me welcome everyone who's joining with a special welcome to anyone who might be joining for the first time. The Massachusetts Historical Society was the first historical society founded in America. We have been collecting, preserving, publishing, and sharing our nation's history since 1791. We hold an amazing collection of manuscripts that is measured in the millions, with the papers of US presidents, soldiers, mothers, scientists, and pioneers. We publish these collections, we make them available to researchers, and we host an active schedule of programs for the general public, educators, and academic audiences. We're making our collections and our online programming available for free, but we're only able to do this thanks to the support of our members. If you're not a supporter of MHS, I hope you'll consider joining to support our work. Our speaker tonight is historian Lori Rogers-Stokes. Dr. Stokes studies the founding decades of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, focusing on the period from 1630 to 1680, when the forms of church and state were put in place that would shape Massachusetts and American history for centuries to come. She is a writer, public speaker, and public historian, as well as a contributing editor to New England's Hidden History, a digital history project of the Congressional Library and Archives in Boston. She will be speaking tonight about her new book, Records of Trial from Thomas Shepard's Church in Cambridge, 1638 to 1649, Heroic Souls. The work offers a new reading of manuscript records left by Puritan minister Thomas Shepard in Cambridge. Through new transcriptions of the original manuscripts and transcriptions of never before published writing by Shepard, the work sets the stage for a new understanding of Puritan spiritual preparation in the 17th century Cambridge Church. The book concludes with a challenge to the negative reading of women's records that is central to the established scholarship, revealing their powerful, confident, spiritual identities and voices. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stokes.
Thank you, Gavin and Catherine, and thanks to everybody who I can't see. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my slides, and we can get started. I hope everyone can see that. I am here to talk with you tonight about the records of trial that I discovered long after they had been previously discovered. Records of trial from Puritan women in the Cambridge Church in Massachusetts Bay Colony from 1638 to 1649. And as I say, these were records that remained fundamentally undiscovered even after they were found, and someone published a transcription, and they were extensively studied and commented on by scholars, including me. I found that even after all that, they were basically unknown. And that's what my book is about. My book, actually, true to my form, has about 5 main points. The one I'm focusing on tonight is how these records, here's a page out of one of Thomas Shepard's notebooks where he kept a record of a meeting with Brother Crackbone's wife in a session of trial. How did these records become lost even after they were rediscovered? So I think it's important, before I get into all that, to tell you what is a record of trial? What are we talking about? And this is a quick walkthrough. Puritans at this time in New England were meant to be on a path of what they called spiritual preparation. They believed in predestination, that eons before he created the universe, God decided who, he knew every person that would ever live, and decided whether or not to give them grace for no other reason than that it was his will. And so your job on earth was to discover God's will for you. Had he granted you what they called assurance or grace, and what we today call salvation, or had he not? So your job was to discover your spiritual estate, as they would have called it. You did many things to help you along this path. Primarily, you read the Bible, but you also engaged in a lot of private prayer. You listened to sermons by godly ministers, and you met with other people to share your stories of seeking, your experiences, your progress, your setbacks. And when you met with your minister, and perhaps 1 or 2 other trusted people, these were called trial sessions, as in a trial run. I'm going to talk with you about where I've been and where I feel like I'm going, and I'm going to try and tell the story of my seeking. Now, eventually, the hope was that this spiritual seeking would result in you discovering that you did have assurance from God. If that happened, you would be propounded for membership in your church. Everyone at that point had to attend church, but not everyone was a member. You only gained full membership by giving a convincing public narration, which is step 5. They called it a relation of that spiritual experience. I started out at square one, and here's the way in which I found assurance revealed to me by God. And then once you gave a successful relation, you became a church member. So the records of trial kept by Shepard were his personal notes of informal, mostly private meetings with individuals who came to him over weeks, months, maybe years, and shared their spiritual journey with him. And he gave them counseling, and he kept records of where they were, so that when you met with him after a 2-week break or something, he would remember where you were at. These are the records we're studying. Now, this is not how the records were presented when they finally hit the light of day in publication in the 80s, in 1981 and 91. Most of the records from Shepard era Cambridge Church have been lost. We don't know where they are, and it's a shame. But these notebooks, which had been deposited at 2 separate archives at NEHGS and the American Antiquarian Society, were rediscovered by scholars in the late 20th century, who misinterpreted them as relations because of this little title that you see at the top of page 1 of the first set. The confessions of diverse propounded to be received and were entertained as members. You hear a lot about relations. When you study the Puritans, there are very few that were ever recorded. It was very exciting to think we finally have a set of 51 relations from the Cambridge Church. This is awesome, everyone said. The problem was that when these 2 published transcriptions by Solomon and Woolley in 1981 and by Mary Rhinelander McCarl in 1991 were published, they led scholars sadly astray, because these were stories of seeking, and they were at all different points in that journey. Some of the records in the single notebook that we have from Shepard were of people who maybe were having their 20th meeting with him and they were well along the path and they sounded pretty assured. Most of them did not. Most of them seemed to represent either people who were really consistently struggling or were perhaps just at the start of their journey. When a narrative of failure and doubt and confusion is presented as a finished relation, a finished story of success, you have to ask a lot of questions about this religion. What is it with Puritan religion? Why was this enough? And so scholars said, well, it must be because, struggle was just an end in itself for these Puritans because it was such a harsh religion. One of the quotes from my book is that since most records did not have any proofs of assurance, scholars described them and the speakers and their whole society as thoroughly depressed, that they didn't really believe that assurance was possible, and they settled instead for an endless self-punishment that was approved or even mandated by their church and society. Because these were written pages, these narratives, these conversations, these notes were studied as if they were speech given aloud, or speeches, as if they were literature, that they were meant to be written down and studied. And so this conviction that these were relations, that somebody stood up in front of their church like I'm speaking to you and told a story, and Shepard sat in a chair and hurriedly wrote down shorthand notes of what they were saying. It just erased some very obvious signs that these were not actually relations, but scholars who studied the published transcriptions were led astray, including this scholar. I confidently said in a New England Quarterly article in March of 2016 that all of those narratives did show proofs of assurance. This was wishful thinking, and I was incorrect. Let's take a look. Here is a page from my own copy, obviously, of the 1981 published transcription. And when you look at the page, it just comes at you like an avalanche down that page. My laser pointer, there's no paragraphing. It's just many short, kind of disjointed sentences that start with and a lot of them don't seem to follow or make sense. They're abbreviated. And again, the idea was that these were shorthand. Shepard was taking dictation as someone spoke, so of course there was no paragraphing, and of course it seemed disjointed. But you remember seeing this page. It's what I showed you earlier. It doesn't look the same. And this was information that I happened upon completely by accident. I was writing an article. I had actually finished it on the women's relations, I was still calling them. And I thought, let me get a photo of one of the pages to serve as an illustration. So I went to the archive, I found this, and just like Georgiana Darcy at the end of Pride and Prejudice, my mind discovered knowledge that had never before fallen in its way. Look at the difference between the two, between this avalanche of undifferentiated text and all of the paragraph marks. This is the same section. All of the paragraphing and all of the very pronounced punctuation that Shepard used. He followed the 17th century English practice of not ending a sentence with a period, but with a semicolon. And then when he wanted to show a pause or a full stop, he would just add slashes, a couple of slashes for a short pause, a lot of slashes for a long pause or for a stop. And as I looked at all these, suddenly all of these ands made sense. This thing that looks like a capital C, that's how he wrote and. You see them at the start of each line. They represent separate thoughts. They represent perhaps even separate phases of the conversation Shepard was having with these people, or separate sessions. Sometimes there's such emphatic slash end punctuation that you think it must represent the end of a particular session. This is from that same page. This is Mrs. Crackbone talking, and she's talking about how she read a godly book that really impressed her because it said, if you give your, you have to give your whole soul to your searching. You have to give your heart, and if heart is given, then eye and foot are given. Like you have to give your whole self to this. And you see Shepard has 4 slashes after the semicolon. There was a stop there. And who knows what conversation they had with each other in that pause, or if Mrs. Crackbone sat there silently, something sparked a memory. And this next line says, "And so I wished my parents knew me." And it's this astounding moment. You are there. It's a snapshot of a moment where this woman thought about how her commitment to the radical Puritan religion and its seeking estranged her from her parents. She begins her record by saying her brother put her into a godly household, not her parents. And this moment comes along and it derails her sense of progress that she had, thinking about how she wanted to devote herself entirely to her seeking made her realize what it had cost her. And now she's even more divided away from them because she's in New England and they are in England. Can you even find that moment in this? Here it is. And so I wished my parents knew me. But as it's presented in this transcription, it's just one of the many baffling, unconnected statements in one long, undifferentiated narrative. Here's another record. You can see all of the places where there is paragraphing and end punctuation. And I found this to be true in all of the records. This is the published page of what I just showed you. You can see that I went back to my own copy and I started putting in all the places that there should have been paragraphs, just trying to make sense of it for myself. Here's one very, very nice example. Barbary Cutter's record. Here are the last lines of it. You can see emphatic punctuation here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slashes. And then you see it down in the last line, slashing, that is written over. Here's how it's presented in the transcription. And so answered all doubts from Christ I saw, somewhat more, and this day in forenoon. Don't know what it means. Barbary ended a session. That seems clear by this emphatic end punctuation, saying some doubts had been answered. That's pretty good. That's enough progress to perhaps end on. But for whatever reason, that conversation continued. And she made some more progress. And so Shepard wrote over that emphatic ending punctuation and said there was somewhat more. She made a little more progress. And then right before your very eyes, you see Barbary Cutter find assurance. That morning, this day in the forenoon, she overcame all of her doubts. How do we know? Because Shepard went back and put all in a superscript, answered all doubts from Christ this day in the forenoon. It's a remarkable moment of witnessing somebody's breakthrough that is sadly not present in this sentence in the transcription. Here's Mrs. Crackbone's final triumphant statement. This is 17 slashes that we get after this. What is she saying? I won't read it all aloud to you, but she says her house burns down in New England and her child was rescued from the house and she stood there watching it burn down. And she had said earlier in her record, in her story, that she had a new house in New England, but not a new heart. She was disappointed and frustrated that her spiritual seeking was not going any better in New England than it had in Old England. And so as she watches that house burn down, she thinks, good, let it burn. I don't want a new house. I want the house. My spirit is on fire. It's going to destroy everything I have inside of me. I prayed the Lord would send fire of word and baptize me with fire. And then you see right here, Shepard makes a very big and sign. And again, it looks like a thought that came after a potential conclusion. Since that moment, and since the Lord hath set my heart at liberty, 17 slashes. That is a remarkable moment. Her prayer to be baptized with fire has been answered. Her old house, her new house is gone, but she has her new heart. Again, presented in the transcription, it's very hard to make sense of. And you can see my own hopeless note down at here at the bottom. I wrote unconvincing the first or second time I read this. Unconvincing. I couldn't believe that this really showed somebody who had assurance, because that big barrage of text did not reveal these moments to me the way the primary source did. So you ask yourself, why were scholars who saw pages with this kind of punctuation and paragraphing and separate ideas, why did they present them in a way that could only overwrite those voices, in a way that spoke over them? A primary voice silenced by a secondary voice. I don't know the answer to that question. But when that overwriting happens, in a transcription, you get oppressed Puritan women who are stripped of all personal identity and agency. And that fits with what we want to believe about Puritans being harsh. And so we think, okay, yes, this makes sense. But if you get the opportunity to look at the primary source or a one-to-one transcription of it, you see something so different. Heroic seeking, women who are active and making meaning for themselves, creating separate spiritual identities that are full of emotions. The heroic soul has all of God's attention. The whole world comes down to the seeker and her God. And what's amazing and pretty much uncommented on by the secondary scholarship is how, if you take away the titles of most of these women's narrations in the notebook, you cannot tell if they were written or spoken, not written, spoken by a man or a woman. There are no markers of female sex or feminine gender. It's hard to think of a parallel example from that time, or really any other time, where a woman talking about her life would not be recognizable as a woman. Most of the women whose records we have in this one notebook were wives and mothers. They don't talk about that. That's not what this is all about. Their meetings with Shepard, their spiritual seeking was about them as individuals. It's anachronistically modern and intriguing that they created multiple identities for themselves, and one that is private, spiritual, and completely independent. I'm just going to pull out 4 women and give very brief examples from their stories. Catherine, known only to us as Mrs. Russell's maid, seems to have been a middle-aged unmarried servant, but she was on a spiritual par with her employers because she joined the church after giving a successful relation. Hers is one of the stories that does conclude with assurance. Mary Gookin, wife of Daniel, the famous Indian minister, described in McCarl's article as the model of a gentle, pious wife and mother whose story of seeking is anything but gentle. And it's an epic story of intense struggle that includes her wanting to end that marriage. We have Martha Collins, a grieving parent with nothing to lose in New England, and then Jane Holmes, a young wife and mother, who in the second half of her narration bears witness to sexual predation that she suffered. Throughout these and all of the women's records, it's astounding at how active they are. You see these phrases all the time, repeatedly. Nothing was passive about spiritual preparation for Puritans. You had to make meaning. You couldn't just receive. You had to analyze and question and sort out and confront and question. It was all your own work. Nobody could do it for you. And it required sustained activity. And all of these women were up to that task. Here's Catherine saying, I knew not whether the Lord would pardon me for my sins. I knew he could, but I questioned, would he? And hence I sought the Lord in public and private. And it's typical that you meet a setback. You cannot believe that godly perfect Christ would really pardon your sins, you as a repulsive sinner. But you don't rest in that depression or wait for somebody to explain it for you or make it right for you. She gets active. She seeks the Lord in public and private. She reads the scripture. But she doesn't just find some promises that sound good and say, oh, okay, it's all right. She's still doubtful. She's still seeing, does this apply to me? And then I love what she says at one point, but to go back, I would not. I should have included that somewhere in the title of the book. To go back, I would not. All of the women could have made that statement. I sought a ministry that came nearest to my soul and that I loved most, and so I found Christ to me. Not, Christ was revealed or I took cover. I found Christ to me. And hers is very short. It would fit on one printed page. Very powerful narrative by this woman who leaves no other imprint in the public record. This was it. And it's a pretty, if you had to leave behind one record of yourself, this is a pretty good one. Mary Gookin was stirred up to resolve to seek God, and if I perished, I would perish. The stakes were high. What's more important than discovering the state of your soul and whether you're going to be damned in hell or saved in heaven for all eternity? This drives the activity. It makes it so important. And you may find out that you did not receive assurance. You may find, to your understanding, that you are not saved. But you still have to do it. You have to be brave enough to take that journey. And if you perish, you perish. I thought I prayed and believed only because I was told I should. This is anathema to any spiritual seeker. Everything has to come authentically from yourself. And it has to go directly to God. It's striking how often women say, I talked with a friend, I talked with an elder, I talked with a minister. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Everything you receive has to be made sense of by you, and someone may be able to help you or they may not, including your husband. I thought I would speak to my husband about it. Then I thought I would plead with the Lord, and the Lord helped me to believe through prayer, my own action of prayer. And so I went up and down rejoicing. I think it's 6 women out of 40 something who even mention a husband, and most of them are in passing like that. Well, my husband decided we were moving to New England, or my husband died, or I thought I would talk to my husband and I didn't. Very minor. You could take out that one sentence and never miss it. Martha Collins had many objections, again, just like Catherine. Can I really believe that Christ offers mercy to me, a terrible sinner? Am I elect, which means saved? And I refused when my husband spoke of the free offer of mercy because I thought it was just his affection for me. Here's a husband trying to be helpful and trying to give her encouragement. It's hard to think of a time or place where a woman wouldn't rely on her husband's reasoning or her husband's affection to decide something for her, but not here. Martha turns to the Bible, and when she reads the Bible verse, I will forgive iniquities for Christ's sake, then her objections are taken away and answered, and she's persuaded that the gate is open for her. Jane Holmes' story is sort of well known outside of the small circle of people who might study these records because she talks about how John Underhill sexually harassed her and tried to lead her into unwanted sexual connection on the ship over from England. She didn't have a chance to land in New England before this began. And it was brave of her to publicly address that. But that second part of her narrative really hits harder when you know the first part and you see what a strong, powerful, independent person she was at a very young age. She was, we think, 24 when she gave this relation. So the thing she's talking about happened when she was young and a teenager. The first line of her story is that I had a stepmother who had many children of her own. It was an affliction to me, and I thought it good to make use of it. I began to read the Bible. I think it's good to follow the Lord. I couldn't live holy in my father's house. I wanted to live in a minister's house, as a live-in servant. So I went to the vicar of the town, but even he does not live holy enough. I thought the word taught us to be pure, and he was not. And if we just strip this down to its essentials, when and where on the earth would what a teenage girl thought be considered important? What a young, unconnected, unimportant teenage girl thought about the vicar. It's only of crucial importance right here in this spiritual identity and this spiritual seeking that Jane is going through. It's identity conferring to her, that she uses her mind and her understanding and her desire to find her own path. And just before she leaves for New England and we encounter the second half of her story, she says, Puritans were spoken against, but I took their part and they told my father. We have a feeling this was not a problem for Jane. She wanted to go live in the household of a godly minister. And she starts by asking her father to let her live there and ends up telling him, I was resolved to leave whatever became of me. So when powerful voices like this are lost and erased and overwritten and spoken over by all of us who come afterward and read them, it is a real loss. It is not just removing a nice to have extra from the story of our history in this nation, but a foundational stone. And in this case, it's difficult because not everyone, very few people are going to be able to travel to Boston and read the original Shepard manuscript pages. That's not going to happen. We need to be able to rely on the transcriptions that we get. And we need to rely on the scholars or the historians' commitment to representing the primary voices. And it's hard because they're completely outnumbered by the secondary voices. Records from 400 years ago have been subject to 400 years of commentary by people who came later. There's far more secondary voice happening than primary voice. And that pressure, that anxiety of influence is strong. And it's something that we are taught to do, unfortunately, from an early age. Here is a page from an American US history textbook, covering the end of the last ice age to 1775 in about 40 pages, like they do. And we can see up here in the main text, you're getting the main story. At this point, we're at King Philip's War, but it's jumping around from place to place in a very compacted way. And we see down here at the bottom, this little square that says review. The questions in this review section at the bottom of this page are enormous. They're questions of intense magnitude, and they are just thrown down here into a footnote. What if these questions were all up in the main text instead of down at the bottom of the page? And what if we turn to primary sources so that these questions about how Native Americans felt about English settlement, European settlement, could be answered by Native Americans who experienced European settlement, instead of, as we see in number 5, teaching 21st century teenagers to speak for those indigenous people. Imagine you are an American Indian watching the arrival of a European ship. Write a paragraph describing it. How do you feel about these people? We're taught from an early age that one way to show your mastery of content is to step into the place of the people you're studying and speak for them, speak as if you understood them. And it's not fair because it's not possible, but it is a problem that we have a hard time shaking off. And when primary sources are seen as less important than secondary commentary, and the primary sources are by women and Black Americans and Indigenous Americans and all these other people who aren't white men, then of course you have white men speaking for all of these other people. And when an incomplete historical record like that is presented as complete, it gives you the assumption, it teaches the assumption that the contributions of these people who are spoken for were not very important. And so those contributions are not important to preserve in our history, and those people are not important to protect in our nation. And this is, of course, not just a problem for historians. Very recent history from January tells us what happens when a society is told that only people up in the main text matter. I call this sidebarring, because often this box that we see at the bottom is in the side margin of a textbook. The people are sidebarred, like they're interesting little counterpoints to real history, and they can be represented by a single photo or quote, or you taking their place. So I think all of us who are doing history work of any kind feel, or should feel, I will go ahead and say, that whatever we're studying, whatever we're talking about, we need to try to get to those primary sources as much as we can, and to demand them, and to really listen to them when we find them. And I'll just close, Gavin mentioned that I'm a contributing editor at New England's Hidden Histories. And this is a project sponsored by the Congregational Library and Archives that collects colonial era church records from New England, the vast majority of those churches being congregational. You can see that there are church records, there are the personal papers and documents of ministers, conference records, and they have just added this People of Color BIPOC finding aid, which is a fantastic addition, finding aid for this collection. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of church records that have been basically lost because they either were not transcribed or digitized, or people didn't know where they were. So thousands and thousands of pages have been digitized and transcribed, and they're so full. They're such a rich repository. They're much more detailed than public political records, like, you know, records of the legislature kind of thing. And now there's a finding aid where you can specifically find BIPOC churches, BIPOC members in majority white records, indigenous focused records, anti-slavery abolitionists. It's a wonderful addition to that collection, which can just join the many primary sources out there that await our attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori. And I would just reiterate to the audience that they are welcome to ask questions, and I think that we would love to hear some questions. But we ask people to use the Q&A function, which for most people is at the bottom of their screen. We do have some questions already. One said, the idea of predestination is difficult for modern people to understand. How do we make sense of people who would discover that they were not chosen, not just losing all social controls? Like, why don't you rob your neighbor?
It is the magic of the glass half full or half empty. Sorry. I'm this way too. When you hear about predestination, your first thought is, well, what if you're not saved? And people ask that question all of the time. People talk about it in these records from the Cambridge Church. Well, if I'm not saved, then I got nothing to lose. But the way most Puritans looked at it, the way most of them were encouraged to look at it by their minister and elders was, if you don't know that you have assurance, you also don't know that you don't. It could be a lifetime search. Like, often they'll say, I was ready to give up and someone told me, don't give up, you don't know yet. So you could take the lack of assurance, like you haven't found it yet, simply as you just have to keep looking, and not that, oh, it's not there and you should just stop.
I suppose that makes sense. It's the whole, well, I won't get into it, but I remember being very impressed by a study of rats in different cages, where one rat, if he pressed the lever, nothing happened. One rat, if he pressed the lever, he always got a treat. And one rat, if he pressed the lever, it was a random random reaction, whether he got a treat or not. And the rat who got nothing just paid no attention to the lever. The rat who got a treat every time he pressed it whenever he wanted a treat. The rat who it was intermittent pressed it all the time and could never stop. So,
That's the
I guess,
email lever.
yeah, we're not that far from that. Could you, we had a question from SB who asked if you could help clarify the role of Shepard in this process. You know, in your description, in some ways, it sounds like he's transcribing or taking notes on what's being said, but what was his role in guiding people through this? What was his presence in this space?
Again, I always have to start by qualifying that everything we're saying comes from 2 notebooks of Shepard's that we have found. There's so many records from Shepard that we don't have. We don't know where they are, or they're gone. So working from the limited number of primary resources that I have, it's really kind of like jazz. Like, you have to hear what's not there. When you look at the records and you see the pauses, you have to imagine these were pauses in which Shepard could stop taking notes, either because the person was going over territory he already knew, or because they were talking and he was in counsel with them. And I think that is primarily what the role was, that you met with the minister, not so he could, solve it for you, but so you could get some guidance on what you should do next. Some people will say in their records, they'll make references that are kind of like, last time when we spoke, I was struggling with this, and so I was going to go read the Bible about it. Now, I'm here to say how it went since then. And so I think he was there to listen, to give someone a safe space to share all these sometimes terrible, depressed setbacks and the joy of a breakthrough, and to offer you a little bit of guidance about where you might turn next. And eventually you start to get a narrative, that you're getting a narrative together that represents your seeking. And I think he was there to help guide that internal narrative.
So Beverly wrote, so interesting, thank you. Did nearby contemporary Reverends George Phillips in Watertown or John Eliot in Roxbury leave such records?
We do have some records from Eliot. I don't know of any from, I could be totally wrong, from Watertown. I would say go to the Congregational Library website, go to NEHH and look. They are listed by town. I think there are Watertown records, but like I say, relations are rarely found because there was no reason. If you'd gone to a minister in that time and said, why don't you write down someone's relation, there would have been no reason to do that. They were transient moments in which the main goal, the main action that happened was they revealed a new saint. Not that you got something written that you could study or pass around or learn from or teach. Relations were an event, they were an action. And so writing them down didn't make any sense to them. Keeping a record of someone's progress toward a relation, yes, that was helpful. But the final relation itself, this only became a thing in the 18th century. You will find many hundreds of relations written down in the 18th century. And even the 19th century, I've transcribed them from as late as the 1860s and 70s. But in the 17th century, they were not written down.
So I just had a question. Can you think of examples of other primary texts like the trials that give voice to women or other traditionally underrepresented groups in history?
There are church records in general can be very detailed like this. It depended on the minister and how detailed a record he wanted to keep. But if you get someone like Samuel Phillips and Rowley, who seemed to write down every single interaction that people had in that church, you can learn a lot about women, about indigenous members of the church or people living in the same space, African members, enslaved people. I'm no expert in it. I'm just beginning to really focus. I know enough. I'm up to here with the story from the Congregational Puritan side. I know their side of the story, and I'm just starting to get into the wealth of resources out there about people who are not the white male Puritans. But I think starting with church records is a good place to start. They're all online. Most of them have been transcribed, and you can get, very intimate view of it. But almost anywhere you turn in recent scholarship, you can find really good scholarship that really relies on primary sources as much as possible. So I would say look for things that have been written since 2014, just to pull a number at random, and you're probably going to get something more primary based than something older.
Well, that sort of brings up another question that somebody asked, which is, is your study here somewhat of a cautionary tale for documentary editing? The people who transcribed these texts previously tried to transcribe them as accurately as they possibly could, but clearly they were missing a mindset or a condition. I mean, just it may have been lack of paper and economy of paper. Is this sort of a caution about taking your modern sense and not taking a step far enough back in terms of how you're approaching these texts? Like, how do you have to get yourself into a mind space to understand this?
It is about the way you approach it, and scholars, I don't know if it's like this in other fields. I study the Puritans, but Puritan scholars are extremely open about telling you how they feel about the Puritans. And it's usually that they don't like them very much. And it seems clear in this instance that a combination of believing that you are reading a rapid fire dictation of a live event and the belief that Puritan people were so oppressed that they could not speak in coherent sentences, which I've seen in scholarly writing that claim made, came together to completely override what was really on the page. But then again, I was one of those scholars, because I didn't know that these weren't accurate transcriptions until I happened on a whim to go and look at the original. If I had not done that, I wouldn't know any of this. And we can't all go. Not everything is digitized, though colonial North America, that project is working on it. Not everything's digitized. It can be hard to read the handwriting. Sometimes you have to really count on people who do have that access to give that to you. And that's, any of us who have any kind of access to those original archives bear that burden of responsibility to not be the only ones who know about it and to share it with other people. But I think a really nice example of that pressure, even when you want to get the truth out there, is that Mary Rhinelander McCarl found 16 more of these records in a separate notebook in 1991, 10 years after Solomon and Woolley, and she had worked with them on their transcription. And she did a one-to-one accurate transcription. I found it at AAS. But when it was published, it was changed to look like the Solomon and Woolley. I don't know if that was her decision or the publishers, or if you just couldn't risk publishing something that looked so different from the other one. But she had done it. She had done an accurate transcription that then was not published. So that's an unfortunate mystery. So it's about mindset, but I think even though you can't always go look at the primary sources, what really got me was that I had read these records, and it just didn't satisfy me that they didn't make sense. I was not willing to settle for the idea that, well, of course they didn't make sense because these people were so oppressed. I'm like, that just doesn't work for me. And there must be some other answer. And so I think when you get that voice, like, this can't be right, I don't feel like this could really be the case, follow it. Try to follow it to a primary source and see if it's right or wrong.
So Lindsay wrote, did you get a flavor of Shepard's own personalities from these notes?
One of the chapters in the book is all about that. If the question comes up, if these are not relations, why does Shepard include them in this notebook? Why would he just take a partial sampling? It's not like somebody's full, like, why? And so the notebook that the first ones are in, the 1981 transcription, is actually a notebook that Shepard devoted to all of his doubts and fears about New England. And this is, 3 years after he got there. This is 1638. It's very early. He had already decided that it was not what it was meant to be. And I go into a number of reasons why, kind of speculation, but informed speculation. And it wasn't because of the Hutchinson uproar like you might think it was. There were many things, including the very founding of Cambridge, that made him doubtful. The immediate loss of his beloved wife once he landed, the circumstances that brought him in to Cambridge after a man he respected, Thomas Hooker, had left. Many things led him to feel doubtful. One of the major ones was he required a special step at the end of preparation that none of the other ministers seemed to have demanded, which was that instead of just waiting in humiliation at God's feet for him to reach out and say yay or nay, you were supposed to just uncontrollably be driven to leap to Christ. You want him that badly, and he'll either push you away or embrace you. You don't wait for God. You don't passively wait for God to tell you. You take action and you make the leap, and then you see if you get rejected or accepted. This was extremely hard for his parishioners to do. And their failure to do that, I think, really worked on his mind. Like, he felt that they were not, that maybe they were hypocritical and they weren't really, devoted. And I think he put these records that show a lot of struggling, and a lot of the people explicitly say, I can't take this final step. I can't make that last leap. I cannot do it. For him, this was just another evidence that the whole project of New England was flawed and that it was not going to work. He could show amazing compassion, I think, for the people in that moment, but taken as a whole, it was not reassuring to him.
So we had a question, were men and women and people of different social stations considered equally capable of assurance or salvation? Did women have to work harder to understand their salvation status?
Everybody, had been given grace or not, long before the universe existed. So that was very equal. And the Puritans loved to speculate that it could even be someone terrible. It could be some terrible murderer. And they actually have assurance. They like to deal with this imponderable. But the question of why is it so hard? Why is it so hard, to figure out, to find God's will, to have it, to discover it, plagued them a lot. And it wasn't so much that it was supposed to be hard as most people really wanted to be sure they weren't making a mistake, that they weren't settling for something and not doing enough questioning, and better to drive yourself crazy double checking on earth than to sit back and slacken your watch, as Mary Gookin said, and then find out when you die that, oh, actually you hadn't really had the right proofs. Women did not have to work harder. This is another statement that you'll see in the secondary scholarship all the time, that, oh, the women were more confused. The women were more willing and spent more time calling themselves sinners. I don't see that at all. I mean, I have been up and down and through these records 1,000 times. I don't see any difference. And as I say, if you read most of these records, you can't tell if a man or woman is speaking. There's no difference in that way based on sex.
I think we have time for one last question. Wyman said, how is a parishioner supposed to know if God accepted or rejected them? It's kind of a big question.
That is a big question. That's for us a real imponderable. Those people who claim in these records that they found assurance, it was an electric moment. It was a physical shock. It was an overwhelming physical and mental experience that left them laughing and crying and jumping up and down and shouting out the window. And they'll say these things. You knew, if you discovered that you had assurance, you knew it. And all we can do, I guess, is, once we have listened deeply to the things they describe, is to try to put ourselves in their shoes a little bit, which is, we've all had struggles, long-term struggles. And when you finally feel like you've made a breakthrough in them and that you have, found a way to get past them or something, you feel that elation, like, oh, yes, I'm finally free of this thing, or I finally gained something I've always wanted. When something good happens to you that you've been waiting forever for, you feel that elation and you know that you've achieved this. Many of them say, I read the same Bible verse that I'd read 100 times before, but this time I knew it was speaking to me. They'll say that. It wasn't just in general, it was saying to me, Christ has come to save the sinner. And why in that moment, they had a different response to it than they had before, we don't know. We just know that those who did claim it were very sure. They weren't trying to, like, did that happen? It was a very powerful moment.
Well, thank you very much. I can say, having grown up in Cambridge, this is an eye-opening discussion about our community's past that is a little further afield from what I've been used to.
And I was really struck. I always say for biographers, you have two contradictory tasks. One is to respect the past and acknowledge that it's an alien world. It really is, it's as though you went into another planet, and you have to respect that. At the same time, you have to find the commonalities, the aspects of that life that echo our life, the things that make us fundamentally human. And Lori, I just think you've done a great job. Thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into what is truly, in many ways, an alien life, but also making us feel like we understood them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I was very happy to talk with you all tonight.
And thanks everyone for joining us. I just wanted to point out that we do have a discount on Dr. Stokes' book, courtesy of Palgrave Publishing. So if you are interested in learning more on this fascinating story, I would encourage you to either print the screen out really quickly or wait for our follow-up email, which will come shortly, which will also include this discount. So thank you all for joining us, and have a good evening.
Everybody. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.